Hi everyone. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today I'm going to be replacing the seals inside a leaking hydraulic cylinder. This hydraulic cylinder is on a Gehl 4635 SX. It's actually an SXT. It's got the turbo, so it's the 57 horsepower. Somebody just placarded it incorrectly when they repainted it the first time. And what you see right now is that I've already taken apart the connector to the boom, to the bucket. And so the only thing you had to do there is override. There is a little drop down bracket that you have to pull the pin in order to let this bracket drop down so that the bucket will stay up even if hydraulic pressure is lost. And so this is what you use right here. Okay, so step one, lift your bucket. Step two, pull that pin. Actually, you can do either one of those in any order. You can pull the pin first and then lift the bucket and wait for it to fall, or you can lift the bucket and then pull the pin. But once you pull the pin with the bucket fully extended, it will fall down over the cylinder, and as you lower the bucket, or as you release the hydraulic pressure from the piston, from the hydraulic cylinder, it'll fall back down until this bracket right here holds the bucket in place. And so once that's done, what I had to do was climb up on top of the skid steer and use a wood broom handle, or a piece of a wood broom handle, and I pushed out the pin that went through the top of the hydraulic cylinder. And then once I pushed out the pin, I was able to drop the cylinder down, and now I'm in the process of loosening the retainer, and I broke that with a nice long bar, and I'm using a 18-inch pipe wrench here. And so this cylinder, the interior of the cylinder is 2.5 inches. I'm not exactly sure how large this is, but I'm guessing somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 inch to 1.5 inches. But I've already purchased the rebuild kit, so I'm going to get busy. I'm going to take it apart, and I'm going to show you the steps as I go. One of the things I forgot to mention was, before loosening the retainer, the cap, you need to take an Allen wrench and remove the set screw. Otherwise, you won't be able to back it off. And so this is now removed. Like I said, I used an 18-inch pipe wrench and a breaker bar in order to get it started. It's got a lot of torque that's required to remove it. These are the two lines that I loosened that go into the cylinder. This is just a more convenient place to remove pressure from the line than it is to do it on the back side of either one of these cylinders. And I wanted to leave the cylinder on the skid steer while I rebuilt it, so that I was able to use the skid steer itself as my vise to hold the cylinder in place. Okay, and so right now what we're going to do is I'm going to be removing the cylinder, the shaft, from the barrel. Okay, once you've got the retaining nut moved away from the front of the gland, this thing right here is called the gland, and it helps keep fluid from coming out the end of the hydraulic cylinder when it's in operation. It contains the dust seal, or the wiper. It also contains a couple of other seals in here. But once you get that retaining cap removed, then what you do is you throw a come along around your bucket, and I've got it connected with some cable, and all I'm doing is applying light pressure. And since I've loosened the hydraulic fittings down here, it actually is coming out fairly easily. And right now the gland is out, and I'm about to pull the piston out. It's out now. You see, here is the piston. It's connected at the bottom. There's a bolt on the bottom. Above it's the gland, and here's the rod. Now make sure you don't allow this rod to swing freely when it comes out. Have your hand on it, because if it does and it nicks or damages the piston or the gland, it's time for some new parts, and those are expensive parts. Not quite as expensive as the entire cylinder, but if you can avoid doing that kind of damage, you want to do it at all costs. Anyway, I'm about to take the piston off, and I'll be sticking that back up here in the top in order to do that. I'm going to reattach it here so that I can use it as a vise to take that bottom nut off. To get the bottom nut off, what I did was I hooked a tie-down strap through the frame of the roll cage, and I put the wrench where I'm pulling outward. That way I'm pulling against the strap instead of pulling against the cage, so I don't scratch anything. And then I just use 2 big wrenches. The retaining nut on this particular one is a 1 5/16, but there are lots of different sizes, anywhere from 7/8 all the way up to a couple inches, so they can get pretty large. But after just a little bit of pulling, this one broke free. So you can see it's coming off right now. And I'm going to screw it out just a little ways, and I'm going to take a rubber hammer, because this thing right here is pressed on. I'm going to take a rubber hammer, I'm going to knock it loose so that it doesn't go flying if I did it with the nut completely removed. Okay, back in a bit. Okay, here we go. Rubber mallet, apply liberally. One tap, knocked it loose. Oh, and by the way, I used an aluminum pipe with a steel rod in the middle of it so that it wouldn't scar up the bushing. And that's what I used to hold it in place. I didn't actually put the original pin back in because it was kind of hard to get out, and I didn't want to do it twice. Okay, I've already replaced the sleeve and the plastic O-rings and the rectangular O-rings on the piston. And for me, the easiest way to get these off, I didn't have a set of dental picks, and so what I did was I took a razor blade and I just simply cut this plastic ring that's at the top of the piston, and inside that plastic ring there is a square preload that goes underneath it to push that ring out against the side walls of the barrel of the cylinder. And so one of the problems that I was having is that the last person who rebuilt this, I don't know if you can see this, but they didn't get the ring in there exactly right, and it twisted, and it caused a little bit of a problem. And I was going to show you also, when I took out the internal seal, it completely came apart. So these pieces right here came out. There was practically no seal in there, and so no surprise that it started leaking. So I've cleaned up the gland. I put it down in some carburetor cleaner and got it as clean as I could. Got some of the surface paint off of it and some of the corrosion that was going on. There's a little bit of corrosion up here around the top. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to see if I can get this other little seal on the inside out. In order to get the seal around the top, the dust ring, all you have to do is put a screwdriver in and push it toward the center. Just push it right in toward the center and it'll pop right out. Easy, easy, easy. This center composite ring, the split ring, is probably the most difficult one, just simply because you can't get a handle on it. And so what I found is the easiest is to get a screwdriver underneath it, a little small screwdriver, that blue one. Get underneath the lip and then push it toward the bottom and then grab it with a pair of pliers and just pull it out. Okay, I know I didn't show you putting this on, but here's the completely rebuilt gland nut. Once I took it out, I noticed there were some scuff marks on it. A little bit of scoring, but it didn't look like it was bad enough that I couldn't just hit it with a little bit of 1000 grit sandpaper and knock down the high points and clean it up to go back in. One thing to keep in mind, there's another how-to video on putting in these inner seals that uses a pretzel type configuration after you heat it in water. And what I did was I just boiled some water, poured it into a coffee cup, dropped both the dust ring and the inner seal into the water, and then was able to use a small pair of pliers to twist it into a pretzel shape, push it in, and then let it snap into place. And it seemed to work pretty well. Took a few tries, but in the end it worked pretty well as a method. So it didn't damage the seal or anything. One thing I did notice was, I didn't notice this to begin with, but there's a little bitty deformity, little chip right there in the dust seal. So that's probably going to reduce the life of this over the use of this particular piston, but I'm not going to send it back now. I've already got it back in place and I'm about to reassemble it. So like I said, a little hot water goes a long way to making these easy to put back together. And on this composite ring back here that is the split ring that goes inside, on that one of the things you have to do to compress it to go into place is that you have to make it overlap at the edges and push it in and then push it to the side. And so I'll show you with the old one here. What you have to do is you push in, make it overlap, and then push the back side into place, into the interior, and then turn it, and you just work it around in there until it pops back into place. And this one was probably the most difficult in this rebuild. Just simply getting it out and getting it back in took probably 15 to 20 minutes of work. Somebody who does this regularly probably can do it a lot quicker than I can, but it took me quite a while to get this together. Overall, right now, this part of the rebuild took me about 35 to 40 minutes total, and that was working leisurely. I decided to bring it back into the house where I had a little bit of air conditioning to work on it, so that made things a little bit easier. But this one here took probably 5 minutes, and this took the rest of the time. And like I said, this seal right here, we'll see how it lasts. It's got a little bit of a tiny chip in one side of the dust seal, and what I'll do is I'll try to orient that into a location where it does the least amount of damage over the long haul. Okay, I've gotten the gland back on, and let me just go through how I did it. Okay, first thing I did was just simply stuck the gland on. I simply stuck the gland on with the cap above it. Okay, it wouldn't go on very far. It only went on probably 1/8 of an inch because it was too tight. And so what I did then was I used a trailer hitch bolt. This goes on a 2 5/8 inch trailer hitch, and this is big enough to slide over this shaft all the way up. And then I took the the nut that came off the bottom, and I used that as a press to press it on. And then once it got on all the way and it was flush, then what I did was I used the spacer. This spacer sits between the gland and the piston. I used this spacer and a rubber mallet and just hammered it on the rest of the way. And so it didn't take very much at all. Once I threaded the nut on and got it up as high as it would go, you can see didn't do any damage to the bottom. The nut stayed pretty much still while I screwed on the other one, while I threaded on the other one. And so I was able to get the entire thing on in about 2 or 3 minutes here. And now I need to put on the piston. And I'm using a bucket of oil to soak each one of the parts in before I put them back on. Before I put them back on the shaft. And I clean the shaft and oil the shaft. I need to clean it again. I see something's already gotten on it again. Word to the wise, don't use your wife's good towels. I always keep a store of extra towels. I know how tempting it is to find a nice clean white towel in the laundry room and walk out the door with it, but you get in trouble for stuff like that. Okay, now I'm going to try putting the piston on, and what I'm going to do with the piston is I have to put on the O-ring first, and then the piston goes in this orientation. It goes up like that. Okay? I'm standing up on the wheels now, and I've taken the piston down. I'm taking the cylinder down. I've taken it down, and I just started pushing it into the tube, into the cylinder, and I'm using a rubber mallet to hammer it into place. And I've gotten to the point where the hydraulic fluid is, and so I'm going to try to start screwing on the end cap here. So I got to push the gland back in and start the end cap. No leaks. Okay, again, what I did was use the end cap to press the gland on into the cylinder. And so once I got the gland partially into the cylinder, enough to where I could get a few threads on the end cap threaded on, I was able to use the pipe wrench in order to thread that back on. And remember, replace the Allen wrench key, or the Allen wrench set screw. And also make sure that you, when you reassemble the pin, that you put that put the bolt back in the pin so that it doesn't slip back out. Grease up your bushings, and you should be ready to go. Now, there are different kinds of cylinders out there with different disassembly procedures, but it's all basically the same thing. So you can do this too.